So, Daniel, thank you for talking with me. Let's start at the very beginning, which is where and when were you born?
I was born on December 18th, 1953, in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Or at least that's what I was told. I don't remember it too well.
So that makes you a Sagittarian.
That is correct. Finally, we got to the most important detail about my entire life.
So are you adventurous, forward looking, maybe outspoken? Does that fit you?
I would say yes. I think most people would also.
I did a trilogy of visionary scientists, people who are on the foreground of thinking about consciousness, and the Sag people were the most common among that group. They ask deep questions, and they're willing to take on the establishment.
It does sound familiar, I will say.
Okay. Um, when you were growing up in New Jersey, what messages did you get about being a man? Because the young men that I'm talking to who remember better middle school say about middle school it started, don't be a, don't be a, don't be a. But there wasn't, well, be a, be a. So I wondered what kind of messages you got from your dad, from your peers, from your teachers, whatever.
My older brother, Mark, who is a little over 5 years older than me, was called Marcy by my father. And I was hearing that from way earlier than middle school. Now, my father died actually even before I got to middle school. So he died when I was in fourth grade
Wow.
of a heart attack. So that's part of what I think brought me into the field of men and masculinities. But certainly there were messages about don't be a girl, don't be, I'm not going to pee, dot, 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 why, just a lot of negative messages. And one of them was even about getting cooties,
Oh, yeah.
girls. And I actually
That was
looked
from
at,
peers, right?
for sure.
Yeah,
And
girls have cooties, boys have cooties.
well, in my land, only girls had cooties.
Of course.
But that's the way, that's the way it shows up. Obviously it's the other, but I think that at least the boys, it was something that you could be infected, with something. It's like some type of germ, which is really quite remarkable. I never really thought about it so much at the time, being rather reflexive and not so reflective. But I have recently looked up cooties, interestingly enough, because I was doing a presentation and I was looking at exactly these ways that boys start to learn to not be girls. And you had said something a moment earlier, Gail, about somehow not what to be, but what not to be. And I would say I think that's true in a lot of ways. There was also to be tough, to be kind of take no prisoners, and a lot of it was like, don't be this, don't be a girl, don't be a crybaby, don't show emotion, don't be vulnerable. And the great irony about all these things is that those aspects of really being vulnerable are part of what help us connect on a human level. And so I think a lot of times early in life, boys learn to not be relational. And there's a term, recursion. I don't know if your listeners will be familiar with it, but it's usually engineers use it because it's something that recurs, recursive, keeps turning back on itself. And so there's a way that, in this particular case, the belief that boys are not relational, are not interested in emotional connection, and are essentially kind of more uh, individualistic, that whole belief pattern, or what psychologists call schema, is what actually leads parents and teachers to treat them differently. And so the set or expectations lead to particular behavioral interventions that reinforce the belief itself. And then you go, see, that's the way they are.
There's a great study that people know where teachers are told these kids are really exceptional. These kids are normal. And the ones the teachers think that are exceptional do better.
Yeah, Yes, and it's the same with gender.
Right. So, do you think this is changing? Because, like the 10-year-old, 11-year-olds that are in my life, they don't do the cooties thing. They don't think that girls and boys are different. They don't think it's weird if you have a good friend who's the opposite sex.
Well, there are certainly changes that are occurring, and it's such a big beast, this territory, that it doesn't change overnight. I mean, when I started getting involved with men's work, so to speak, in the heyday of the men's movement in the 80s, particularly in the Bay Area, um, I, as well as many of the people involved, thought that we were going to be a lot further along in 2021 than we are right now. So yes, there are changes. Yes, there is much more of an emphasis on gender fluidity. There are changes, and with change comes pain. Often is the case because there is resistance. I mean, if there were no resistance, there wouldn't be pain.
Mm.
But there is resistance, and that drag factor, keeps pulling on people in a multitude of different ways, and it's quite confusing. I mean, it's
It seems to me that Trump is a perfect example of that kind of resistance to change, and that as president for 4 years, he sent a powerful message. You know, if I'm a man, I can grab women's genitalia, I can do whatever I want, kind of stuff. So, do you think that he exacerbated the situation and slowed it down, or it's just a slow process?
definitely exacerbated. I mean, for sure. I mean, he's the poster child of a kind of negative masculinity. I purposely didn't use the word toxic. I know that toxic is used in the press a lot about toxic masculinity. In terms of the work I'm involved with in my APA, American Psychological Association division, which is the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinities, we never use the word toxic. It's not a term that's used to do research about what's often called traditional masculinities ideology, or precarious masculinity. That masculinity is something that must be earned and can be easily lost. And so you have to keep proving it, on some level. I think that is the linchpin. Proving masculinity and denying vulnerabilities are the linchpin that hold this kind of what I would consider more negative orientation to being masculine, which is not to say that all guys have demonstrated kind of a negative masculinity, or that all expressions of masculinity are negative. But I do think that there are some that are, they get in the way of relationships. And as someone who believes that the core of human life is about our connections, connection with ourselves, connections with other people, to have certain indices that lead you in a direction, don't do that. It's anti-health. And it's part of why I believe, men die, 4, 5, 6 years younger on average. That the guys are really falling behind in this day and age because we're not getting with the times. And the times they are changing, and a lot of men aren't. And when Trump came in, he was saying, you don't have to change. You can just double down on being jerky. And sorry for your audience who are believers in Trump. I'm a very strong disbeliever in who he is and what he stands for. And I will say that, even as a Sagittarius, I never really think about it as a Sagittarius. I'm definitely willing to give my views for sure.
See if you agree with this. It seems to me that the largest branch of the men's movement today is peer counseling groups like Everyman and the Mankind Project and lots of other little local groups. And it's all about nothing political, and we're not going to deal with legislation. We're just going to give you a support and give you an initiation as a man so that you have that kind of support and don't so we can help you prove you're a man in a positive way. Do you agree that they're the largest branch?
I'm not sure, actually, because there's also depending on how you look at whatever this men's movement is, it's not one movement. You know, I think it'd be a simpler way of talking about it. If you're looking at men's movements, I'm not at all clear because, for example, you could say that men's rights activists
The divorce.
are yeah, absolutely in territory of really looking at men's rights and and certainly involved with legislative actions and seeing how men aren't being treated fairly and how girls and women are getting more. I think just generally one of the challenges when it comes to men's related actions and psychologies is that we tend to see things in terms of zero sum. Like if girls and women are being lifted up, boys and men are being pushed down, and vice versa. And I'd like to live in a world where that's not at all the case, where we're helping to lift each other up. And as someone who's involved in the land of gender, it's really hard to have these conversations. It's just remarkable how many people, smart people, professional people, people who are involved even with legislative actions, they just seem to think it's kind of an either or game. And I think it's a both and. Until we really get to that and change our mindset about it, we're still going to be at war. And
it just seems like common sense to me. And Warren Farrell calls it gender liberation. If one group isn't liberated, the other one isn't. That's for sure.
Yes, and Warren is somebody who's seen as a men's rights activist, and he's seen as an either or. Despite
I don't think
he's a friend. He's a friend of mine, so I know him, and I wouldn't say that's the case. But
no, I think of him as a feminist. I think he's a feminist, and I think he wants to have gender liberation, both.
I'm not questioning that. I'm just saying that in my division, he's not well regarded. He's seen as the either or of the men's rights, people. So it's a very complex political, psychological territory, and one wanders in with ideally a prudent attitude and mindset and not assuming everyone's in agreement, because they're not, and it tends to trigger a lot of vitriol from what I've seen.
I was in the middle of that. I was at a Men and Masculinities conference a long time ago, and we wanted to have Fred Hayward and maybe Warren speak. And the, quote, feminist men said, "No, would you have Phyllis Schlafly speak at a women's conference?" And I said, "Yes, I would love to have a debate with Phyllis Schlafly." So to me, it's like a dialogue and a debate is healthy, but they were in that zero sum.
That's what I find, because I've actually recommended some dialogues, even with Warren and someone else from my division, for example, and I got routinely turned down, about it. We don't talk to people like that.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just ignorant, and I've said it to their face. I actually really believe that healthy argument, like in the Greek sense, is valuable. And I would say, like, if you don't agree and you have a better argument, why would you not talk? I mean, we need to talk with you. The Israelis and the Palestinians need to talk with each other. I mean, you don't have to agree with someone. But I think about it in terms of, like, for example, the Harvard negotiating pact, where the whole idea of getting to yes, you start off with what you actually agree on, and then you move from there. But that's not the way most people do it. They immediately start off on what they disagree on, or at least what they perceive they disagree on. And I think actually sometimes there is more agreement than is realized, but people aren't talking about to even find the places of intersection. And I'm a strong believer that we need to do that.
Oh, yeah. And it just seems like common sense and rationality to me. But then you're dealing with human beings who aren't necessarily rational.
What are you saying? Human beings aren't rational? You're ruining my view of people. No,
Look, the history of humankind since after we settled down in agriculture has been war, right?
Well, hey, I have a research article sitting there waiting for me to read it. I started it, and it's about man or human beings being the rational species. And I said, no, not at all. Actually, human beings are the rationalizing species. We rationalize, not we
Right.
continue are driven by confirmation bias, seeing that which we seek to see and don't realize that. But when we're told that that's what people do, they go, oh, that explains other people. I don't do that myself, of course. I am rational. How do I know that? Because I'm me. All my thoughts are rational. Everything I believe. Why would I believe it if it's not rational?
Right. To me, the most extreme example of that is people who say, well, God tells me you're sinners and I should kill you and do jihad. And their God says, well, no, you're the infidel and I should kill you. So, and God tells me to do these terrible things. That's, to me, the most irrational.
Yes, there's a long litany of irrational beliefs and behaviors human beings do. Not us, of course, Gail, right?
No, 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 no.
We're,
We're
we're not.
rational.
Other people.
To go back to your childhood, when your father died, did your mother remarry? Did you have another father figure? Or how did you learn about being an adult man?
I'm still learning at 67.
Cool.
But my mother remarried when I was 13. She married her best friend who had died, one of her best friends who had died. She married her husband, and they knew each other as friends, and they had a very good marriage. He wasn't much of a father figure to me. Very nice guy, not abusive at all, but not much of a father figure. I've wended my way through the land of male role models, and I've had some over the years, and a lot of disappointments there, and I think I've become a role model to a good amount of men over the years, and there are friends who I have who I consider role models, but I don't have any. There's no one who I kind of have had as a core teacher per se. I've had other teachers in my life, but just you're thinking about your audience here. Guys are not just learning about masculinity or being a guy through a particular role model. It's all over the place. It's in movies, videos, it's in games, it's in books, it's in athletics, it's in music, it's everywhere you look, and especially these days where social media is everywhere. It's impossible to not be bombarded to some degree with how you're supposed to be. And to me, I am in the territory as much as possible about gender transcendence. I'd like to see a world where gender isn't the first portal, that we see people. And of course, we're going to notice, someone's, sex, or at least what we think it is. I mean, I'm not going to be delusional, think that's not going to be always part of it. But I do think that historically we've looked at, boys and men are supposed to be masculine. And masculine means particular, sets of things like you're the warrior, you're the hero, you're the soldier, you're the fireman, what you do is very instrumental. And what girls and women do is very emotional and expressive. And so what has been designated as healthy for boys and men to identify with a particular masculine or male role, and the same for women, for girls and women, for the female role, that's a healthy sign to be relational. I think that's off. It doesn't work. It may have worked at some point in human history, but the way the world is, the ever-expanding, interconnected world, especially where relational skills and relationship skills are more important now than ever, if guys don't get that and develop more of that, you're going to keep falling behind. And that's it. And that's just the reality of it. And so I see it as a leadership coach and involved with some leadership research, and I can see where women are scoring significantly better than men in terms of leadership effectiveness. Why? Because of relational skills. Their willingness and ability to mentor, to be empathic, create caring connections. And that's not been historically part of traditional male role. And we just really need to expand. If we're going to be resilient and get with the times, we need to expand our mindset and skill set, certainly as males. And, girls and women are expanding, and sometimes not in the best ways, because they start emulating some of the elements of so-called masculinity, where they get cut off more from their feelings and their emotions, and I don't think that's a great thing. So as things evolve, we notice that evolution is not a straight line. I mean, there's fits and starts and course corrections, and this is too far. And I look at the world, and I can see even on the left, and certainly politically left, some parts of the left, I go, wow, that's really far and super judgmental, hostile, and not comparing it to some of the insanity on the extreme right for sure, but it gets too extremes for me. Like, really, what are we bringing forth? And I think about the Gandhi line of be the change you want to see in the world. And some of this, the level of vitriol and hostility is not the change I want to see. And I believe standing up for a belief. So I'm not saying this isn't about, placating or playing nice, but there are ways of standing up for what you believe in a respectful way without the level of vitriol and hostility. That is my hope.
I'm thinking an example of what you said about women leaders is the effectiveness of women heads of state in dealing with COVID, like in New Zealand. They really, or Angela Merkel in Germany, they really hopped on it.
Yep.
So if boys are today spending, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, I don't know, hours a day in front of video games, more than girls, because girls are doing the social media more. What exactly is the message besides blow things up?
Win at all costs. So it's a sad thing. I actually work with some people in the video industry who are trying to even change that. They're looking at kind of socially conscious games.
Wow, what a concept!
It really is. To me, it's a duh, to do it. Meaning that it's low hanging fruit, and basically, how do you tap into the to perhaps biological to some degree, certainly conditioned orientation of guys to be the hero and be a hero for a really good cause, which is social justice, for starters. So that's what I'd like to see.
You could do some kind of video game with Gandhi and Martin Luther King and other, Mandela, some kind of help them win their battle or something.
Exactly. So that's it. See, I think you're ready to start writing scripts for video games.
Well, I'd be happy to edit, that's for sure.
They do have writers. I mean, that's how it all starts, with the image and writing, and then can you do this, in terms of the graphics and the design and all. But we really do need to change this idea of this, winner take all, competition, treating other people as objects, it versus thou relationships. And it starts early in life, and reality is a lot of boys are treated as objects. And we're going back to how boys are treated, not touched as much as girls, not spoken to in ways, treated in more roughhouse ways. And there's probably something to the roughhouse part of it, but a lot of it is too extreme, and it's ignorant, and it's based on old beliefs and old conditioning. And we keep handing down some of the messages from the past that they don't work.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me is 98% of human history have been hunters and gatherers, and I've been reading about those cultures, and they were totally egalitarian. And the only hierarchy was, I really respect you that you're a great hunter, and I really respect you that you can gather where no one else can find the berries. But there's no hierarchy. And so it seems like our DNA is wired for cooperation, because they had to cooperate as small bands to make it. So that seems like that we have the potential to be cooperative. I guess
Oh,
Marx is right that with agriculture and settlement, then patriarchy developed and domination.
well, I think that the potential for human beings to be the greatest saint imaginable and the worst sinner imaginable is all packed into the DNA code. I mean, when you think about epigenetics, which is basically that our genetic code is vast, and what gets activated is the relationship between the genetic code and our conditioning, causes and conditions. So that's why it's real. I didn't even use the word epigenetics earlier, but talking about boys, that if the emphasis in terms of the conditioning, from parents, from teachers, from neighbors, is such that you treat someone a certain way, just like when you were talking about the teachers who were told that one class was super smart, even though it was randomly selected, and the other wasn't. Expectation in treatment related to expectation is huge. And so if you treat boys as if they're relational and they want to snuggle, which they do, they're super relational when they're younger, and then they get these messages. If you keep treating them that way throughout life, they'll be more like that. That aspect of the genetic code will be activated, and the ones that are geared toward winning at all costs, and that's there for sure, won't be as much. And even thinking about like thinking about Fred Trump, his father, who was a tyrant, and Donald, there were winners and losers. You got to be a winner. There's losers out there. Take no prisoners. Get over on people. Lie, cheat, and steal your way to the top. He got the message. I mean, if he had a different father, I mean, he would not have been the tyrant I believe he is.
And his mother was sick a lot, and he didn't get that nurturance, that feminine nurturance.
No. Or masculine nurturance.
What led you to be a psychologist? Where did you go to college, and why did you major in psychology?
Well, one never knows the answer to these questions, but that because would have to be totally tuned into one's unconscious. But I will say that certainly my father's death was key. I was very aware that when I was playing in Little League, baseball, or when I played basketball later, when I was on the high school tennis team, other kids had their fathers in the stands. I didn't, and so that was certainly something in my psyche. And there were just some events that occurred that got me interested in this. One of them was when I decided not to go out for football in high school, and I was a pretty good athlete, and I was expected to, and I happened to be unhappy. I decided to go into the band because I played clarinet, and I was dreading the time when it was going to come out. Ellenberg's going into the band. What? So I happened to run into like the star athlete in the class. I used to play sports with him. It was just the two of us, right before ninth grade, walking by the high school. And he yelled out to me, "Hey, Ellenberg, you're going off to the football team, aren't you?" It was kind of more of a statement than a question. And I was kind of like, "Oh, God, I don't want to." And I said, "No, I'm going out for the band." And he yelled out immediately, "You P ... Why?" And, he was a decent guy. It wasn't like he was, but it was just like he was going by his own male condition. Not that I was so reflective about it at the time. I felt like, oh God, where can I hide, from this? So that was certainly an event. And when I was I'm picking some little dots in like a
continuum.
Dot drawing of Donald Duck that you have 64, and I'll probably give you 4 of those dots. But one of them was when I was struggling about what to major in college. And my mother said to me, of all people, who was not super tuned into my psyche for sure, she said, why don't you study psychology? You've always been interested in what makes people tick, which is true. And I went, okay. And it just hit me like a light bulb went off, and I've never doubted it since. And I was like 2021, maybe 2021, at that time. And so there's just that interest in people, and ultimately, I do have a vision about people being deeply connected. I mean, I've been someone who's been very disconnected earlier in my life. I'm pretty connected now, and I have a lot of great friends, and have a sense of community. And I wish that there were more, in the world. And I see that the big problems on this planet are problems of disconnection. No one goes to war because they feel too emotionally connected.
Then where were you an undergraduate? Where were you a graduate student?
Boston University undergraduate, and graduate. I got my master's at JFK University and my Ph.D. at California Institute of Integral Studies, where I wound up doing a little teaching there and was on the board for a while, and left the board a couple of years ago when I was decided to be in office for my APA division, and my volunteer work became too much given all the other responsibilities I have and had.
Why did you leave the East Coast for California?
It was the dream, California dreaming. I actually met a California hippie when I was living in Boston, and he would tell me about it, and I knew about San Francisco and Haight Street and stuff, and there was always a part of me that just dreamed of going to California. And so I decided when I was probably a sophomore in college that I was going to make a sojourn out there, which I did 11 months after I graduated. I lived with my mother and stepfather for almost a year, and then I got in my car and I drove 14,000 miles over 4 months. You see, we didn't have GPSs back then, so I got lost. No, I didn't get lost. No, I just spent a lot of time traveling and meeting people and arriving in San Francisco in the summer of '77. So a long time ago.
How has your initial lack of connection affected your marriage? Because you've been married a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think about my father and his profound abuse of my mother, which I witnessed.
Verbal abuse.
Verbal abuse, not physical abuse, but verbal abuse, and it was daily and relentless. And I certainly was never like that, never the level that he was. But early in our relationship, which we're just past 35 years of knowing each other, I was given toward not extreme abuse, never physical abuse, but certainly I'd be nasty and
critical
for sure, critical. And over the years, she gave me feedback for sure. Like I did not marry someone who I could run over, and that was conscious and unconscious because I wanted to change. And she's been quite formidable. I think one of the things I look for in a mate is that someone who's a worthy opponent, which may sound a little strange, but it's someone that's not the only quality, but someone who can stand up and is not going to roll over at every moment. So feedback, and I've just been in a lot of context, not only from her, but I've been in a leaderless men's group for 34 years, and I've done a lot of work on myself, and so I've gotten a lot of feedback, and ways that I was sarcastic and mean-spirited. I just thought it was funny, and I've basically at a certain point when enough people give you feedback about the same thing, they're like, what's the one common feature in this feedback? Well, that's right. It's me. So maybe they're actually seeing something in me. Who knew? So I think I've been someone who's, I know I am someone who's learned from feedback, and that involves connection, trusting people that they're not simply out to get or to prove, or that there's not some rally about how to make Daniel's life difficult, or miserable. So, people want to be treated well. I do. You do. You
Sure.
know, and I'd like to live in a world where we treat each other well, and when we're not, and the other person feels some affront or hurt, pain, that we're open to hearing about that and paying attention to it. And I think that's a lot of what my work with people is about. Even my work in organizations, like, you can do well and do good. I mean, it's not like you don't have to be a jerk to do well. I mean, you can make a significant difference in an area that needs attention, and you can do well in the process. That should be our focus.
Yeah. Did you have kids? Do you have
I,
kids?
I have one who's 32. We
What
have one who's 32.
is it, a boy or a girl?
It is a boy. It is a man now.
And what did you learn from being a father to a boy about how to raise a boy with options and flexibility and all that?
I think the school he went to, for starters, was a Waldorf-inspired school, which is really about the imagination, and there wasn't a lot of stuff about gender. I didn't see it, and boys and girls play with each other, so there wasn't the cooties. He grew up in a very different environment, than I did, so there wasn't really that much of a focus around gender. And frankly, if there was
Yeah.
anything about gender roles, my wife would play more of the male role, because she was the one who did more discipline, and she was dealing more with finances and some things that would be classically what a man would be doing, that she was doing more. So I don't think he grew up with those kind of beliefs about how men are and how women are in particular. And he's married now. He treats his wife very well. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a really good thing. When you work with couples in your private practice, what kind of issues do they come to you with, and why is it that women initiate 70% or so of the divorces? They're pretty pissed off, it seems. What do you see among your clients?
Sorry about that. I would say it usually is women, shockingly enough, who do initiate. And we're just thinking about, in terms of what we were talking about earlier, about boys not learning that much about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that marriage is about being in a relationship, right? And so if guys don't learn some of those basic ways of orienting, how does it happen? It's on the job training, as it turns out. And women eventually get tired of asking for something and not getting a particular response, or not having empathy as a reaction to that. And so they will be the ones much more likely to take action and to reach out and reach out for a therapist. So that, I assume, and generally, if I ask a man and woman how they see the relationship, and I say on a scale of 10, 0 terrible, 10 awesome, usually women will scale it about 3 or 4 points lower than men will.
Yeah.
And so that discontent is obviously a motivator to take some action. And that continues on in terms of, like, the guy hasn't changed in the way she wants to, so obviously at a certain point they would be more prone to initiate divorce. And they feel like they've said it enough times and the guy hasn't listened, and so that's part of a common favorite. I look at this territory about people getting involved with marriage counseling or relationship counseling as way down the road from some of the earlier, problematic lessons that in particular boys receive, early on. And so that's part of the challenge that we're really facing. Can we pause it for a second?
Yeah.
I'm gonna take this. I realized I didn't take my. I was rushing, doing a bunch of things. I normally take my phone. Okay, so it's out. So we will not hear any more phones. All right.
It seems like one of the things women are most angry about is sharing family work. And all the studies show that when they're both employed, she still does a lot more childcare, housework, cooking. And so they're angry about it. And they say, honey, can you help me? Oh, no, I'm watching the sports thing on TV. Just a minute. So how does one resolve that dilemma?
It's often, sadly, through threat.
I'm going to leave you if you don't shape up.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the idea of, someone's at the door and the person doesn't respond, and they go, person doesn't respond, and then they're slamming, I'm here, and so it's oftentimes just getting louder about it. I'm not saying that's the best way of orienting. It's much, much better to get the door when there's a little knock at the door. But, some people just don't get with the program. Other people do. There are a lot of guys who are doing much more household work, doing more child rearing.
Well, they are doing more than their dads, for sure.
Yeah, and I just think it's important to note that there are changes, and we can, if we talk about like things haven't changed, they're exactly the same, it can be disheartening. And so I say celebrate at least the small successes and keep going for more of what you want. And I do see that there tends to be a kind of threat reactivity in relationship life because people are experienced, not necessarily as allies all the time. And I mean, allies means different things these days, so I don't mean it in the sense of social justice in particular. I'm talking about it, although that's important, but I'm talking about more in terms of ally.
You got my back, I've got your back.
Yeah, for sure.
So what kind of tools, like Sue Johnson in attachment therapy says, a lot of times the woman's come, and the man's like, I'm going away, and she's coming. And she says, like, the first thing is to be aware of those kind of patterns, name them, so you can at least identify what's going on between the two of you. What kind of tools do you give your couples? She's pissed because he's not doing enough. He feels resentful because she's not nice to him. She's not giving him enough sex because she's angry at him. How do you get out of that?
Well, think about the metaphor of a ping pong table. And you're going, a ping pong table? What does this have to do with it? So generally what we see on a ping pong table we see the balls that are on top of the little ping pong balls. And I would say those are the behaviors. You didn't pick up your clothes. You didn't do the dishes. You didn't take the car in. You didn't pick the kid up on time. You didn't. But what we don't talk about are the bowling balls underneath the table that are slamming up against each other's ankles. Mm. And those are the self-concept issues that are invisible. So the fact that I've asked you to do dishes and you don't do it is triggering, and this is what I help couples get to, is triggering a belief I have that I don't matter, that I am insignificant. Or it could be that I am not lovable. If you love me, you would. If you thought I was important, you would. Now, generally, these are unconscious beliefs. These are kind of the water to the fish. We don't even know that they're there. And so that's what's triggering. Now, that doesn't mean you don't want the dishes done, by the way. Sometimes people hear about this like, so if you felt more significant, you wouldn't care if the dishes were in this. No, that doesn't mean that. But it does mean that the added charge to it, the emotional reactivity to it is really fueled by these unconscious beliefs about ourselves. And they get activated. They're the bowling balls, activating the ping pong balls. And so part of the work is to become aware oneself, one partner, about why is that so painful to you? But people are arguing about just the behaviors without recognizing that there's deep pain, sadness, grief, frustration underneath that is really much more about the core, of the person. So to become aware of oneself and for the partner to be aware of that. So when you don't do that, it triggers my belief about myself here. Now, you don't want to use it as a manipulation, but more as a relational way to orient, toward each other. So you understand oneself and understand each other. So that's one thing about getting to a deeper level, which tends to evoke much more compassion than reactivity. So that's one thing that I like to emphasize. Another is really that about partnership. What exactly is true partnership? My wife and I wrote a book called Lovers for Life many moons ago. It came out like the late '90s, so it was quite a while ago. And the whole theme of partnership, and you were even talking about that earlier in terms of hunter-gatherer societies, much more of a sense of partnership, creating more of a template to that. And sometimes that involves challenging some kind of gender ideology that gets passed down. It's part of what I had to challenge in myself about the man just being the dominator type way of orienting, which is part of what we get handed down through the kind of a dominator paradigm. So it's learning to really shift that paradigm and really looking at what is it that you really want, in this marriage, in this relationship, and what's getting in the way. And a lot of times people get in the way of it by bickering, about something. And those are the ping pong balls, but it's being fueled again, by the bowling balls. And, it really on some level comes down to, is a person willing to get over themselves, and sometimes accept the way their partner is, which is, not always how you want it to be. I heard an acronym from a good buddy of mine some years ago who I was working with, leading workshops together, and the acronym is WAIT, which stands for Why Am I Talking? And so I've said that to a lot of guys because I tend to counsel guys individually, some women, but mainly guys individually, and couples. And particularly for guys, I think for women, it's certainly at times, it's like, do I really need to say that? You left your light on, for the third, do I need to say it? Can I just turn it? Do I need to make a big deal, out of something? Is it worth going to the mat, over this one? And I practice this much more than I used to. So it's as much as I used to really believe in total candor and transparency. I've come to like, is it really worth it? Is it that important? Can I metabolize that? Is it something that's really part of my own mindfulness practice? To let go of perfection or having things be exactly as I want them to be, and just be on some level more accepting, and to accept me as just to take as is, but the way things are. I think that's also.
On the other hand, if you gunny sack and gunny sack and gunny sack, and then the last straw happens and the person explodes, and the other one's like, how come you're so upset over a wet towel on the floor? My God, it's one little towel. So there's got to be a balance between.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
I indexed too strong on the other side, or too much on the other side of saying too many things that bothered me. So it's true that other people can be wired opposite, and they need to speak more. There's not one size fits all. We all have our own individual fates that we have to work with in terms of how we turn them into our destinies. The one last thing I would say right off is from a mindfulness perspective, to recognize that how easy it is to identify with something. And so, reacting to something, it's an aspect of us. Like, I know for me, I can be in a very chill place, be pretty peaceful. I can be super reactive. Who am I? Am I the reactive part of me that can be active? So we say in one moment, am I the more chill part of me that can be active in moments? Who am I?
All of the above.
All of the above and more.
Yeah.
So I'm really a strong believer in complexity. And that we are complex beings, and that we are divided in certain ways, and the more we can actually kind of step back and say, oh, that's this part of me. I can look at my wife and go, oh, that's that part of her. How can I bring out more of this part of her, which I enjoy more than that part of her, rather than blame her for that part of her and tell her she couldn't be that way and be more like this. What can I do to contribute to her being more like that?
Do you know Hal and Sidra Stone's voice dialogue work?
Some.
I love them because that's exactly what they say to do. I need to be aware of what part of you is speaking now. So I know if it's in your your adult, your child, your inner critic, your judge, and then I can react accordingly. I think it's really profound. So you were president of the APA's group about psychology of men and masculinity, which also has a journal. So what kind of issues are current ones that APA, this division, is exploring? What's up?
Well, just first of all, it's not that I was president. I actually am president right now.
Oh, I thought you were president in 2020.
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
in 2021.
Got it.
So I'm actually on the downward slope of that presidency, which ends on December 31st, and I become the immediate past president for, like 9 months at that point. But anyways, well, my goodness gracious, it turns out that the woman who was there was a woman who was president in 2020, Wisdom Powell, who was a colleague and friend of mine, and she's an African-American woman, and her presidential initiative was kind of lifting up boys and men of color and looking at health disparities. And it was, obviously incredibly timely that she was president as the pandemic really began. So part of the work was focused on how to bring more legislative awareness, just in general people's awareness about these health disparities, and we saw them really markedly, particularly during the pandemic. But that's been going on for a long time. I think that in terms of the journal, it has a whole wide range of research that is done. It's not only people from the division. And by the way, your listeners can even get the journal. It's if you look at Division 51 of the APA, you'll find it on our website. Well, there's different research on what happens with Asian American men and how are they seen, for example, as less, quote, masculine than white men. And so people who have particular research interests in any aspect of men, masculinity, gender will submit research articles to the journal, and it's quite well known and it's quite effective, and I'm a strong believer in the journal. In the division itself, there has been division. I think maybe we shouldn't call these things divisions, huh? Maybe that's not a good place to start with, huh? We should call them visions. Vision 51 or Vision 6 or, so, but there has been division around, in some ways, feminist orientations to gender, and then, there are maybe a few people in the division who were kind of really looking more at the men's rights, type territory. And what I've seen, and I think it's unbelievably small in this division, but it's a much bigger issue because some people in the division are super reactive, to that, and they take on what I would consider the kind of traditional masculinity ideology in the name of a good cause, supposedly at least, and they become that which they most despise. And so I can see that just the kind of reactive tendencies, that there are, in the left, obviously major in the right. So again, I'm not saying it's the same. I think that the right has lost their minds, just it's so extreme with the Trumpism, there. But that doesn't mean there aren't issues on the other side. And I get tired of the sides part, and I see the sides part, in our division, and I'm more in the complexity camp, as a lot of people in the division are. It's like that, there's a lot of complexity in people, and we all have our sides that are reactive. And reactivity, unmitigated reactivity, is experienced as just threat, and threats automatically trigger defensive reactions. It's just basic psychobiology. Fight, flight, freeze, appease. And I'd like, just in general, to get into a more open state. And it harkens back to, why won't, people debate Warren Farrell? If you disagree and you can prove, like, why would you not even talk to people? And again, I've said this to everyone I've questioned about it, so I'm not telling some big secret there. It's disheartening to me.
I'm sure, like his boy crisis book, I don't think they'd find anything in there to disagree with.
The major disagreement would be the major conclusion that Warren came to, which is that it's father deprivation that's leading to the boy crisis, and that's not a universally accepted conclusion, not at all. So that is a major, jumping off point. There are other points of disagreement in there, but that's the one that stands out the most.
Do you agree with it that the fathers are the main problem or not?
I don't know enough. I don't. I'd have to absolutely pile into the research, and it's just not on my plate, to do that. But I do think, just in general, when it comes to research, research can be very murky. And we know that there is a kind of a replication crisis, in the fields of social sciences. You have two different research teams doing the same experimental design and getting different results. So I know that some people would argue with me, no, it's really just hardcore science. We do the best science and everything. And I go, that may be the case. I just don't know. And so I'm not going to put a stake in the ground here.
It actually doesn't really matter if it's the main. Obviously, it is a problem that needs to be addressed because of the high divorce rate and men's long hours at work and not having examples of how to be a nurturing father. So, in a way, it's a silly argument.
I agree, because it's no matter what, it's multi-factored.
Right.
And so it's like, what, again, I go like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And are there ways to actually join forces? Even with people who you have some disagreements with, if there are things that you can agree with, are there any ways to work together? I don't know how even nations ever work things out, because they immediately have things that they disagree about. And if you only stay with that, all you have at best is a détente, and not even that usually.
Well, that's why we have a history of war as humans, since agriculture. What are you hearing about boys? Because I think there is a boy crisis. There's that book about how teen boys are so lonely because they have to give up their good buddies because they don't want to be perceived as gay. So what is the division? How are they addressing raising boys who have more options?
So just to be clear, I believe what you're talking about, Niobe Way's research, that last one, which is great research about how boys are super vulnerable and relational when they're younger, and then they wind up giving that up. And this is part of the conditioning that is most concerning. We have a task force, the boys' task force in the division, which is focusing on, particularly on boys in education and how boys are falling behind, and creating fact sheets for really looking at what are some of the issues that are going on. And part of what we see, and I haven't actually seen the finished fact sheets, which I think are just about hot off the press right now. But one of the things that we're certainly seeing in schools is that there's a way that boys are not being, how would you say this? Some of their particular ways of orienting, which are a little different than girls. There are some biological differences, and that can be sacrosanct in my division, sometimes saying that anything is biological But to me,
You've
it's
got
kind of unique.
hormones. Hello.
I mean, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily massive differences, but there are some differences, and I think we need to account for those differences. But if you think about boys not learning about relational skills and yet being in school, in related areas and where you're supposed to be sitting there with your hands folded and you're not getting to exert some of your kinetic energy, there can be problems, right off the bat. I think that a lot of schools are even cutting back on physical
Yeah.
education, these days, and you got to blow off some of that energy. But I would like to have your readers or your listeners come to our website and see some of the research, on there, and as well as in the journal.
What about the Men's Studies Journal? How is that similar or different from the APA journal?
I don't know that. I know of the Men's Studies Journal. I can't really make a comment. I know they tend to be a little bit more academic and kind of much more about teaching gender studies in colleges and graduate school. So they tend to be, more academic than ours tend to be. But
What do you know about men's studies programs? Do you know if they're increasing, decreasing? Are they amalgamated as gender studies? What's happening with men's studies?
I'm actually don't know any of the more recent statistics on if there's a greater or lesser prevalence, on there. I do think that in general in the world there is, just an ongoing curiosity, at least, about gender and what is going on with gender and with gender fluidity. These days it's a different land of gender than I grew up with, and I suspect you grew up with.
Yeah.
And so it's confusing, to put it mildly. I've had two clients who've had children have sex changes, and that didn't happen. I mean, you couldn't do it, I don't think, scientifically, excuse me, back then. But right now, we're living in a very different land, and it's causing all kinds of political reactivity, and somehow those people, are taking over our good old American, values of individualism and whatnot. It even connects with mask wearing and vaccine taking and
Bathroom
yeah.
access.
And it's just, I frankly, I shake my head a lot. I'm like, wow, how do we move forward with climate change and all the threats really that we're facing, on a planetary level? It's a very interesting times we live in, for sure.
On the APA site, I don't know if you wrote this, but it says we are still at the very beginning of constructing a new psychology of men. There's an uphill struggle of changing masculinity. We need to expand to men of color, different cultures, men with different disabilities, GLBT. So, could you say a word about a new psychology of men?
Sure. Well, interesting enough, the division, it used to be called the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinity, singular. And it was changed in 2017 to the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinities, plural. That is a huge difference, right? There are a few letters, because basically what it's designating is that there's no one way to be masculine, and so masculinities is basically opening up the field that you can show up and be considered masculine if that's your preference, being in a multitude of different settings, including, being gender fluid. So, again, I would like that to be the case, so that we don't just have this ideal of brave, stoic, individualistic, tough masculinity, take no prisoners, like that's masculinity, and everyone else kind of looks up to this standard and falls short, which itself triggers shame and hiding, and basically it's, self-effacing
Guilt.
guilt attitudes and basically unworthiness and feeling unlovable and incompetent there. So I think we need to go way beyond this. My hope is that it over time becomes less of an issue, like even saying masculinities, like that it's just like, you're you know, okay, you're Gail. Do we have to focus, like, do we have to break you into constituent parts, in order to understand who you are, in order to relate to you well? I would rather have an approach of like, who is this person? Or who is this group? And how do I come to be in relationship with them? And do I have to, relate, oh, they are more masculine, I relate to this, or they are, like, you find a way to connect, you know, through it all. So I think that the masculinities part, at least, is an interim stage of opening up the field, literally the field, so that people can be accepting about how they are, and they don't have to keep trying to live up to some stupid standard that is just not even human. And the guys who most look like that, they're not like that at core anyway, because there's a little boy in every man, that is wanting some affection, is wanting some connection, is wanting some care. And if you learn not to do that, and if you happen to have the physique, and the voice and the whatever the characteristics are that are deemed more traditionally masculine, it can put you in a bigger box because you can be successful, at that, and then you look a certain way, but inside it's very different. So you really have to go into major self-denial in order to keep upholding this particular man box. So it's a trap for everyone, and it's a box that we need to get out of, in general.
Along with that, what I hear from young men who are doing the dating thing is that women like nice guys for friends, but they want to go out with and be sexual with tough guys. So I don't know if that's changing, but that certainly if men feel that's what they're expected to be, that's really hard to break out of.
Absolutely. But I also think that sometimes when you say nice guys, some guys can be nice guys defensively. So it's not simply about being a good human being. It's kind of like it can be kind of appeasing and go like, "Oh, are you okay? Can I help you out?" Like just bringing out a certain really appeasing or placating part of the personality, which frankly isn't that attractive, I think, in general. So I think a lot of times that when we talk about, tough guys and nice guys, why are they nice? Is it genuine nice that's predicated on actually feeling a sense of inner strength? I think that actually is attractive to women, but I think it's too binary the way it's spoken about. Really look at some other factors that are involved in this.
Do you think it's changing in terms of like courtship and relationships between singles? I guess I mostly hear that there's like hookup culture, kind of casual, not really looking for commitment. People in their 20s not likely to get married. What's going on there?
Well, I mean, the times they are changing. I'm sure a lot of these people are looking at just the difficulties in the world and like, do they want to bring children
Right.
into this world, and what can they count on? And these generations are the first generations in American history, at least in the last 140, 50 years, that have it in some ways worse off than the generation before. They don't have it. They're not making as much money in general. Not everyone,
Huge
obviously.
student debt.
Huge student debts, and the world that, climate change, and like, what do they have to look forward to? What can they trust? And it's been said that not taking care of the planet is a tax on future generations.
It is, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And so it's kind of like there's anger toward
There,
boomer, which I am one later day boomer, and but it kind of like if you look at it on an individual level, like how much impact does one person have, on some of these global choices? But I just think there's despair.
Yeah.
That's kind of at the heart, of it all, and questioning and a kind of alienation. And to me, it's quite understandable. So getting some hookups here and there and not deeply connecting. At the same time, there are a lot of, Gen X and millennials who are really interested in connecting and relationships. It's not a one size fits all.
No.
There's a wide range of people everywhere.
I think this was a saying during the World Wars: eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. So it seems kind of like that's the feeling.
Little gallows humor. Maybe not that funny.
No. Well, I want to look at your emphasis in your work is on teaching resilience and how to thrive, not just solve problems. And I know you and your wife developed a resilience program for NASA. What are some of the core concepts and how to thrive and be resilient?
Well, the first one is start where you are. That's actually what Pema Chodron, has said, who's a Buddhist teacher. The basic principle is like you can want to be somewhere else, and you can fear you're somewhere else, but it's kind of like basically life, as Hemingway said, like what is it? Life breaks us all. Some of us become strong in the broken places, or stronger.
Like
So
bones.
bone can heal stronger, from a break. And so the idea in resilience is what's in territory of post-traumatic growth, that you can actually grow from the experience. And I heard from a friend years ago an image I really like, which is the difference between fate on the one hand and destiny on the other. So looking at fate is the hand you're dealt. I have one of my very closest friends, his wife, who's a friend, close friend as well. She had a dear friend of hers just killed in a car accident like a month ago. Boom, just like that. Friend for over 20 years. That's a fate, and that's an extreme fate, or a child who has a really terrible illness, or you can go on and on and on about the fates that we are dealt in life. And then how do you play that hand? Do you go into a cave and I'm not going to trust anyone or anything else anymore? How do you take them code? This is horrible, and how do I metabolize this, and what can I do? Now, that doesn't mean jumping into action. The first step is, again, start where you are, which is feel the grief, in this case, that all resilience begins with some type of disruptive, unwanted change. And life is about that, right? As John Lennon and others have said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. Something happens and you go, boom, there it is. And what do you do with that? And so starting where you are can be starting with, wow, this is incredibly painful, and potentially even crying about that. Because when you think about resilience through the lens of male psychology, which I have quite a bit, that if when you're handed a fate in a certain way, and it hurts, but you're not supposed to reveal pain. At least you're certainly not supposed to cry. What do you do? How do you actually move through grief, which is really at the core of resilience, or at the beginning at least of resilience, when you're adhering to an impossible standard? I mean, interestingly enough, there's cortisol in tears, which is a stress hormone. So crying is one of nature's ways of de-stressing us. And I can tell you that a lot of guys who haven't cried in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, wow, that's like inhuman, but that's part of the standard. So when going back to resilience, to start where you are, and part of it is kind of like, okay, take stock, and where am I? What are my resources? What's the problem? Where do I want to get to from here? Who are my resources? Who are my people? What kind of resources do I have within myself? Oftentimes we look at in psychology is like, what's a challenge or challenges? What are my vulnerabilities, not in a good way? What are the things that can get in the way? What are my resources? How do I develop my resources to be able to mitigate, deal with, metabolize those stressors, that are in me, and how do I turn that particular fate into a positive destiny? So stronger in the broken places, as it were. And one of the best ways I think is to give. Interestingly enough, at those times when we feel resource depletion, it seems a bit paradoxical to go, "You're going to give more at this time when you have nothing to give?" I think at a certain point, when you share things with others, you get stronger. And that is something that I'm a very strong believer in. It's, again, through the power of connection. And so resilience is that which we have to deal with in terms of our lives. And part of resilience is also around self-compassion, because a lot of people are wired to be self-critical. Oh, why did I do that? The irony is that you think about a zebra, who is suddenly being chased by a lion, and gets away. And what does it do when it gets away?
Shakes.
It shakes. That's right. That's exactly right. It shakes it off. It shakes it off physiologically. But what do human beings do? I can't believe that I put myself in harm's way like that. I was just so lucky to get away. What's wrong with me that I would even go near where lions are? I know better than that. What the hell? And they get down on themselves, about that. And obviously we have a bigger brain, and so we are able to find countless ways to criticize ourselves. And so being self-compassionate, and there's a lot of research in this territory, is actually a major antidote to self-criticism. And it's been shown experimentally to be a better strategy toward being resilient, to being self-critical, which tends to trigger more an internal threat reaction, what's wrong with me, versus a more an internal thrive reaction, which is to be kind to yourself, just like being kind to others, because life is difficult. And what can I learn from this, and how can I develop more of a growth mindset, from this experience, which is certainly at the core of thriving. I mean, thriving is not dependent on a disruptive, unwanted change. Thriving is really around building the positive, building on, as my friend Rick Hansen would say, turning positive states into positive traits. That we have these positive states that we experience, but most of us, it's just a nice experience that we've collected, and then it dissipates. If it's a negative thing that happens, then we really build into it. Oh my God, this is me. I'm horrible. I'm this and that. And you are horrible. We turn it into this great statue that we stand in front of and pray before. But I think that from the land of thriving, the more you can build on your positive traits and take credit for things, and genuine credit, not like faux credit, not blowing yourself up, but actually take sincere credit. Like, I did that well, and I was good, and I was kind to this person. Good for me for doing that. And how can I keep building on the positive? That's where we wind up thriving and having a positive vision.
That's the key, is when I make a mistake, it's not, oh, I was stupid. It's, what can I learn from this? How can I change?
Yes, exactly. And that's a very important question.
Yeah.
Because it's triggering that part of your brain, your internal servo mechanism, which is what is behind the search engine, really. Your brain starts focusing, what can I learn from this? And then you start triggering internal websites. Oh, I can learn this. I can learn. If you ask, like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Guess what websites you trigger them?
Yeah. I think that's the key. Just a few more questions. I wanted to ask you something that really bothers me is teens in the Western world increasingly present with anxiety, especially in depression, and especially girls. So I want to know, are girls more anxious and boys just aren't allowed to talk about it? Does their anxiety and depression express differently? What's going on with the increase besides what we've already talked about, the climate change and the economics?
Absolutely social media, for sure. So you asked a multi-level question just now. On one level, certainly social media, we know that from the research that people who spend more time on Facebook tend to be more depressed and more anxious. And I've thought about, why would that be the case? And I think part of it has to do at least with what I'm saying the fact, maybe not a fact, my at least perception that we observe, for example, Facebook. We post on Facebook, and I don't tend to post, but it's showing a lovely curated image of ourselves.
They use Instagram.
Okay, and Instagram, nice curated image, of ourselves. However, we view it through our shadows. Oh my God, that person's got so much more than I do, and it triggers that kind of natural jealousy. People don't like to feel jealous, but they do because that person's got so much of a better life, than I do, and we don't talk about it really. It tends to create a kind of individualistic I'm less and I'm lower than, which obviously can trigger anxiety and depression, and it's impossible to escape. Not to mention some of the bullying that goes on, the fear of being exposed, even if you're not exposed. On social media, there's a fear of being exposed, so that kind of triggers an ongoing anxiety, in a lot of younger people. I suspect that the higher incidence reported in terms of girls and boys relates more to the particular behaviors. Like boys tend to have more acting out behaviors that would not be designated in a DSM-5R statistical diagnosis. But actually, part of what we're seeing in a bunch of books have been about male depression, because women have been seen as more depressed than men. But I think that's a complete misnomer, as a lot of other folks do, which is that guys just tend to drink more, drive faster, get more trouble, do more dangerous things, have more physical accidents, more, so it comes out more in acting out behaviors than in the classic or traditional ways that depression and anxiety have been studied.
So how do boys, do you think because some people say that they're not as affected by social media because they're not on it as much as girls because they're doing the video game thing, or they don't care as much how they look. They're not as judged by their appearance.
I'm sure there's truth to that. I'm the social media aspect of it, the fear of being called out, in some way, as well as looking at and coming short. The combination of those, I think, is quite lethal. And I think it's quite unfortunate. Like, as I said earlier, evolution is not a straight line. And some of the things that have developed have unintended consequences, and we are witnessing those. I don't know how we put the genie back in the jar, but there's a lot of problems that have emerged related to this ongoing exposure. I mean, you think about rat studies. Of course, you want to get into rat studies here, right? No, I'm joking about that, but sometimes they're very interesting, which is that like rats who are given even shocks, like it gets a shock, up, 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 turn out to be significantly less neurotic than rats who are given uneven shocks, uneven intervals, up, 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 up. And so you can never predict when it's going to come. And since part of what the brain does is prediction, and it predicts particularly around pleasure and pain, particularly around pain, i.e. threat, and threats to survival, it goes on overload there, and it's in constant motion. And if you're constantly checking what's happening right now, and it's always available. Oh, I don't want to check it. Oh, here I have to check. I don't want to check it. Here, constantly. There's no escape. I mean, should we be surprised? I don't think so.
But you think boys are as impacted, but just
They may what you said may be a prophylactic against that, which is playing more video games and being on social media less. So you're not constantly thinking about it like that. You can get involved with hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of video games. I think what would be really interesting study, and I don't know if it's been done, would be girls who tend more toward video games versus girls who don't, and girls who are video games and boys who are on video games, and maybe boys who are not on video games and more on social media. I think that would be kind of an interesting study or set of studies there, because it's probably multifactorial about the influences there, like many things.
One of my interviewees is a graduate student at UCI who's doing his dissertation work is on social media use, especially in terms of mental health. I'm going to propose this to him because I think it really is interesting.
That'd be great. I'm happy to talk with him about it as well.
Good. All right. Last question is the men's movement. We've discussed the feminists, the what used to be called masculinists. I don't know what they're called now. Men's rights. What other branches, like mythopoetic, do you know of that are happening today?
Well, there's some combinations of those. General. I think those are the major three areas. They're mythopoetic, Robert Bly, Michael Mead, James Hillman, who's no longer alive, and certainly the feminist men's movement. That's been under the undergirding of my APA division for sure. The men's rights, it tends to be more around men's rights, as it were, and there are just kind of combinations of those, and I don't know what you would call something like, a group out of Chicago, Men Living, that they are really trying to create support groups for guys. I think that there are a lot of support groups. You could say that it was feminist inspired. I don't know at a certain point what influences what at a certain point. To some degree, I don't care. I really care about what are they doing, and is it pro-social? Is it benefiting people? Is it moving us forward from an evolutionary perspective? Is it more regressive, taking us more backward, or attempting to, at least?
I think the peer support groups for men, the kind of counseling based, like Every Man and Mankind Project, see themselves as coming out of the mythopoetic. And they use words like warrior, and they do retreats in the woods and that kind of thing. So maybe you could say that mythopoetic is the biggest branch.
I don't know the statistics, and I've been involved, not with men's rights, but I've been involved with certainly feminist-oriented and mythopoetic, and I don't know how I would ever define myself, frankly. I've been leading weekly interpersonal men's groups for 37 and a half years right now. I've had influences in a lot of different ways, but when I look at these groups, I don't say they're mythopoetic. I don't think they're feminist per se. I don't even know what that means anymore. And I think we have to really deeply define our terms, because even in feminism, there's four waves, of feminism in terms of my understanding, and a lot of feminists disagree with each other about things. So it's not a one size fits all, and it's not a clear territory. And I think that we need to be more prudent in terms of how we understand things. And for me, I'm a supporter of feminism. At the same time, when I hear that guys need to get in touch with their feminine sides, I go like, no, bad branding. Because as a very emotional man who's quite given to tears, that hasn't come up in our interview particularly today, but I certainly can go there. I never feel like when I'm feeling emotional, that I'm getting in touch with my feminine side. It's fine on the one hand, but I just see it as we as human beings have the full potential of all aspects of being human, as do women. I don't think like when women are being assertive or even aggressive that now they're in touch with their masculine sides. It's just like, hello. And I know some people would go like, oh, you're wrong. You know, you're being a humanist. We have to break things down more into their constituent parts. And I go, okay, well, you are free to believe that, but I don't.
What how have those groups that you've been running for over 30 years changed? Have they, in terms of the presenting issues, what the men want?
Not really. I can tell you one thing that the theme of getting in touch with their masculine sides or their masculinity,
Doesn't
I mean,
stop.
no, it doesn't. It's really that's why I mean, there's to me there's a bit of a irony about all this stuff about gender, which is when you really get down to it, um, it's to me it's not that relevant. You know, if you can just cut away the chafe, it's very relevant on the surface for sure because people are very identified, you know, with it. But when you start getting down to what is it that people really want, you know, in general, they want to feel safe, you know, for sure. They want some satisfaction in life and they want to feel connected. You know, those are the basics. And all the other stuff around there, you know, I'm not sure if it's on a deeper human level totally relevant.
I'm reading Marianne Legato's book Why Men Never Remember and Women Never Forget, and she's an MD. I don't know if you've heard of this book, but she really makes the point that we have to be aware that we have brain differences, hormonal differences, that men like are more easily flooded when there's an emotional confrontation. They can't handle it as much, and that there are these differences to be aware
You know, again, I don't know the book, and I would wonder about how much of those gender differences are related to social constructionism and you know conditioning. You know, what is it? Why do men get so flustered when they're dealing with some relational, you know, difficulty? Well, maybe part of it is because they didn't learn how to be very relational because they were treated in unrelational ways. I mean, that's what's influencing what. It's very difficult to strain apart a particular aspect and say, this is the reason why it is. And she may have some good points. I don't know this particular book, but I'm immediately a little suspect about a conclusion like that. So,
of. Okay. Anything else that you would like people to think about in terms of men's changing roles, relationships, thriving?
the words come up of don't give up. You know, don't give up on guys. Don't give up on women. Don't give up. And there's a lot of pessimism in the world and a lot of hopelessness and a lot of helplessness out there. And you know, I think for each of us, we need to really tap into our own resilience. And I know for me, I get disheartened at times. I just keep going, okay. I think about the Japanese saying, fall down 7 times, stand up 8.
That's good.
And that's what resilience is about. So it just keeps, you got to keep going till you drop. And to me, it's kind of like how to keep seeing the best in people, but not being naive and stupid, you know, and really being as respectful and pro-social as possible, even in the midst of intense negative reactions. So we all get to work with our minds, and it all begins in the mind. You know, I think about, was it, forgetting his name, but he said, the mind is its own place, and in itself can create a heaven of hell, or a hell of heaven. And so I personally just keep working with my own negativity that comes up daily for sure. And you go, okay, and I work with that, and then it takes me away, and oh, okay, I can't believe these people. And I start mumble effing, as I call it, and I go, okay, Bill, okay, I want to be, hold up a more positive image about how I want to be as a person, as a teacher, as a being, and continue to hold myself to better standards than the standards I used to. So keep getting better, with it. And maybe I'll end in the words of Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi, who said, "You're perfect, and you could use some improvement."
That's great.